Hi, everybody. Michael Silber here, Event Director for Inlet Australia. Today, I'm really excited to have with us Karl Rábago. And Karl is, we're announcing Karl as one of our keynote speakers at Inlet Australia. He is an American well-versed in the issues of Texas, and he'll primarily be talking about the events in Texas this year. And with some insight from his experiences there. He's now a consultant based in Colorado. He is the principal in Rábago Energy. And he just told me before we came on air that the Rábago name in Texas goes back 250 years. So not only does he have experience in the power and utility industry in Texas, he's got real Texan roots. So welcome. Thanks for joining us, Karl.
Thank you so much, Michael. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Yeah, and thank you again for agreeing to deliver this keynote address. I mean, I think it's a great topic. I think it has, it'll be of real interest here in Australia for a variety of reasons. There's been some noise about some of the states, questioning their participation in the national energy market, which is perfectly, there's real lessons learned in Texas that could apply to this situation. That's probably just noise right now, but I think the lessons in Texas can serve. Will be of real interest to top-level executives here in Australia. So let's get a little preview of what you're going to talk about without giving away everything. So if you could just give us a brief overview of the events in Texas.
Well, some big numbers to take away from the Valentine's Day outage in Texas. First of all, it's important to note that it's not the first time cold weather has vexed the Texas grid. It may be for Australia, but for the Texas grid, it is. Here's some big numbers. We're talking about 70.5 days where the market price was allowed to sit at the high market price of $9,000 US per megawatt hour. Total revenue that moved through the ERCOT system, which isn't all of Texas, by the way, but most of it, was $50.3 billion US. That's the equivalent of 3 years of total ERCOT market operations. It was driven by a shortage of capacity and an increase in gas prices. And it tested Texas's ideological and economic commitment to what some commentators have described a toxic individualism. The idea that Texas is so big, so strong that it can go it alone. We're just in the process of starting to unravel it as we tape this segment. We're going to know more and more, and I will by the time I'm joining you for the conference. But we are already starting to get a sense of some of the big themes, at least of issues that we need to address.
I worked in Texas and lived part-time in Houston for 4 years. So I was an observer of that toxic individualism. Mm-hmm. And I think my boss would have said I adopted some of it. So I think you've kind of addressed this, but the underlying dynamics that led to the situation, is there anything you can add to what you've already said?
Well, the biggest thing everybody should understand is that ERCOT organized itself as a nodal market with energy-only pricing. So they said, no, we're not going to do that capacity pricing. A lot of people spend money on capacity value that oftentimes is not needed. So Texas is going to do it all with energy. And sort of the economics 101 thinking that you have to have in your mind then is that in order for the market to build capacity and have that capacity available, you have to allow prices to go kind of crazy. So a lot of people have said the first blush response was that ERCOT behaved exactly as it was designed to do. But now we're asking ourselves whether we can really afford what it did as it was designed to do. It's a market that's designed to produce the lowest average commodity price for electricity. But naively, I think we're beginning to recognize such a market will not freely produce reliability as a byproduct.
Interesting lesson. So moving on to another thing that got a lot of play during the crisis is that there was a lot of finger pointing at wind. My understanding that wind is only 14% or so of the energy generation capability in Texas, and only about 50% of it was out. So what was the role of wind in that, if any, and was it unfair that there was?
Yeah, it was completely unfair. It was, as we would say in Texas, shooting from the hip, which everyone knows, notwithstanding all the westerns we've seen, is not actually a really good, accurate way to shoot. So when the governor and some others decided to jump on the fact that wind turbines were icing up, they didn't hit the target. The most important thing we're now understanding about wind and the relatively small amount of solar in Texas compared to wind is that those resources performed not only about as well, but even better than expected. Notwithstanding the fact that a lot of the turbines are not winterized and some did not perform, they did what you really need in a crisis. And any utility manager, any operational manager will get this point. When you're in a crisis, what you count on is the things that perform according to expectation or better. And where the system really let us down in Texas during this event was that the gas part of the system did not perform as expected. I've got my dogs going in the background. Sorry about that.
That's not an issue.
Okay.
Makes it more real. So, we'll make sure during your live presentation at the conference that the dogs are outside.
I will definitely do it. And I'll just add one little bit to this, because about the wind issue, right? What it did reveal, however, was that the hedging and the economic contracts around operation, commitments to bid into the market, and all those other secondary financial instruments are where a lot of pain is being felt. Mm-hmm. Just as a little tiny teaser, and I hope we'll be able to get the exact numbers out in time for the conference, but if you were a wind farm, you probably had a hedging contract to guard against price volatility in the off-taking price that you would earn by operating your wind farm, which means you give up some upside in order to gain some confidence that you'll get your revenues. Well, if you did get hit by ice, your hedge provider had to go to market and buy electricity at $9,000 a megawatt hour. And under those hedging agreements, they have a right to go back to the producer for the shortfall. So we're talking ripples and ripples and ripples in terms of financial transactions, all prudent behavior, all reasonably taken measures by people forced to live in an energy-only market that had outrageous consequences when you look at the numbers. That's the story of the Texas freeze down over this past Valentine's Day.
So we'll wrap this up. I know one of the things you're going to bring to this presentation is lessons learned, and
yes.
I think that was a big one that we're still learning. Is there anything else you think you might touch on in your presentation?
I think lessons learned, and then I think what it is transferability. Is there anything, do you have to be Texas to learn the lessons from the Texas experience? I think that'll be of some interest to your audience that is local there in Australia, as well as other international members of your audience. It is certainly going to be interesting to us across the United States, because you just can't miss it, right? It's a third of the country going from east to west. It's a third of the country going from north to south. It's a big part of our country, and what happens in Texas, just like what happens in California and New York, influences our country and influences our energy policy and our energy businesses.
That's great, Karl. Look, thanks for your time today.
Well, thanks again, Michael. It's a pleasure.
My pleasure.